Hello Raptors fans and condolences. As we're all aware, the Raptors season ended on a low note after losing to the Boston Celtics in 7 games. But unlike a couple of other teams like the Rockets and the Clippers, the Raptors went down fighting, giving everything they had and showing no quit. This video isn't going to reopen healing wounds by giving a post-mortem of the Celtics-Raptors series. I'm sure that you could find other channels to give you that if that's what you're looking for. No, today we're going to be looking forward, examining what the future holds for the Toronto Raptors and what they can do in the offseason to improve. Let's buckle up and dive right in. The first thing that's instructive when thinking about the Raptors is the organization's identity, what they look for in players, and the fundamental strategy they try to employ as a team. I'll break them down into 3 very broad, very generalized points that I think are true. Number 1, the Raptors prioritize mental toughness and hard work. Everything is earned. Number 2, there's an emphasis on high basketball intelligence throughout the organization. Number 3, 3 and D. Shooting the 3 and playing defense are the 2 most important skills in the modern NBA. Not surprisingly, all of these 3 things apply to Raptor legend and future Hall of Famer Kyle Lowry. The success, and to a huge extent the identity of the Toronto Raptors, is a result of Kyle Lowry being the team's leader for almost a decade. The Raptors are filled with players that all fit these qualifications. Everyone can defend and shoot the 3. Everyone is a self-starter that puts in work to excel. Everyone is unselfish and has a high basketball IQ. So what does this mean? Well, it means that there are certain types of players that the Raptors are going to be looking for when the time comes to sign players, draft players, and make trades. It's going to eliminate a lot of players from consideration as well. Now let's look at what the Raptors have to think about going into next season. Number 1, finding a true number 1 option. This is all that separated the Raptors from repeating as champions. They have every other element a team needs. Number 2, clarity at center. The Raptors have some big decisions to make with their center rotation. Number 3, free agency and salary cap management. Big contracts are coming off the books. Who stays, who goes, and how much money to hand out will be questions that need answering. Number 4, Giannis Antetokounmpo. This guy needs his own point, because the Raptors should and probably will game plan around his impending free agency next offseason. And number 5 is the draft. We'll cover this in a future video. Let's start with point number 1, which is appropriately the search for a true number 1 offensive player. One of the hardest things to find in the NBA is a go-to scorer that can put points on the board. The Raptors tried their hand with Pascal Siakam as that guy, and although he is a truly very gifted player in many aspects of the game, unless he makes another quantum leap next season, he isn't a true number 1 option. He's a very good number 2. When the chips are on the table, every team needs a player or play, think the Murray-Jokic pick and roll, that can get them clutch buckets. The Raptors have good supplementary scoring, but the Celtics series showed that without a go-to scorer, offensive droughts are going to be a big problem. So what are their options? There are a few players that I think the Raptors should kick the tires on, so let's take a look. First is Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal recently signed a 2-year contract extension that pays him through the 2022-23 season. He's a big-time NBA scorer in the prime of his career who is playing for a miserable Washington franchise that looks like it will be bad for the foreseeable future. I'm sure that there are many suitors for Beal, and I think the Raptors could be one of them. While he isn't the greatest defender, he's not the worst in the league, and his massive usage this season clearly impacted his defense. He wouldn't be asked to do as much on the Raptors, meaning that he would be a bit more dialed in on the defensive end. The asking price for Beal would be very high, and likely include a lot of picks and prospects. Number 2 is Victor Oladipo. Victor Oladipo is a big question mark. Raptors fans will remember the horrific injury that Oladipo suffered versus the Raptors in the 2018-2019 season. He's returned since then, but hasn't looked right. Will he make a full recovery? because if so, he would be a guy that would fit perfectly into the Raptors system, and his contract would expire prior to the 2021 free agency bonanza. In the 2017-2018 season, Oladipo was a two-way player and a legit first-option scorer, and his mentality and tenacious competitive streak would mesh perfectly with the Raptors organization. The Pacers appear to be making progress even without Victor Oladipo, so he might not be in their future plans. He represents a risk, but one that might pay off, especially if the asking price is low enough. Number 3 is a combo of Buddy Hield or Bogdan Bogdanovic, because their fates are kind of entwined. The Kings are a complete mess, and it looks as if one of either Bogdanovic or Buddy Hield are on the outs in Sacramento. Hield just signed a big-time contract, and Bogdanovic is about to become a restricted free agent. Buddy Hield is one of the best volume three-point shooters in the association, and he's shown that he's a legit regular season scorer with some holes in his game, notably on defense. Bogdanovic is a more well-rounded player, more of a playmaker than Buddy, a better defender, but also a much less explosive scorer. Both are 27. The Raptors could make an offer to pry away restricted free agent Bogdanovic, or, if the Kings are more committed to him, make a trade for Buddy Hield. Lastly is internal development. One of the options that's certainly available, and perhaps the most likely to happen, is to try and develop a go-to scorer internally. Fred VanVleet's size issues at shooting guard were exposed in the Celtics series, and he had a very difficult time scoring at the rim. But he's only 25, and he made a big leap this season. If he is re-signed, the Raptors could envision him becoming more of a complete scorer. The Raptors could also predict Siakam take another step, and learn from his incredibly tough series against the Celtics in order to become the guy. Norman Powell is another player that the Raptors could count on becoming a bigger part of their offense. Last but not least, I think that there's potential for a big step forward by rookie Terrence Davis, who had a great regular season and a disappointing bubble. There are a lot of different directions that the Raptors could go to address their needs for a go-to scorer, but those are a couple that I could see that make sense to me. I think that the Raptors got to experience the final look at Marc Gasol as a starting caliber NBA center. Gasol is a future Hall of Fame player who played at a high level, especially defensively, well into his 30s. I would welcome Gasol back in a reserve role at a greatly reduced salary, but I think that the Raptors will look in another direction this offseason, as will Marc, who has signaled that he might choose to go to Europe to finish his career. With that in mind, here's some of the options I believe that the Raptors should consider at center moving forward. First is to re-sign Serge Ibaka. Serge Ibaka is a logical choice to be the Raptors' starting center next season, but they will have to pay for his services as he's an upcoming free agent. Ibaka can defend the basket and shoot the three, but his advanced plus-minus stats weren't stellar, merely okay. The Raptors also had some trouble in the Celtics series when he was put into the pick and roll. I would not be unhappy to see Serge return, as long as he takes a pretty significant pay cut or agrees to a short-term deal. Number 2 is trade for Nikola Vucevic. Now, okay, I know what you're thinking. Vucevic got owned by Marc Gasol in the playoffs last year. He's also not a very good pick-and-roll defender, and he's also a little bit soft, but he does tick a few boxes for the Raptors. The Raptors want their bigs to be outside threats. Vucevic isn't a stellar three-point shooter, but he can hit them. He can also take on a lot of the scoring burden. He's good in the pick and pop, in the high post, does work in the low post, and he can orchestrate the offense, kind of like Marc Gasol, with dribble handoffs and sharp passes. He's also gone from below average on defense to a bit above average, leading the 10th-ranked Orlando Magic defense in defensive win shares. The Magic are also probably eager to rebuild around Jonathan Isaac and move on from the group of veterans that haven't led them anywhere. Perhaps the Raptors can capitalize. Number 3 is to sign Harry Giles III. There's some scuttlebutt around the Raptors that they might be kicking the tires on sophomore big man Harry Giles. Giles is stuck in the NBA purgatory known as the Sacramento Kings, and his contract is up this offseason. The Kings are not known for developing young talent very well, and Giles is no exception. At 21, he's clearly not a finished product, and has tons of areas he needs to improve, not the least of which is his defense. He is, however, pretty talented, and with the right coaching, structure, and culture, he could develop into a good player down the road. Giles is not necessarily a guy that the Raptors would pick up to compete next season. He's more of a project, but he's someone that I would keep my eye on at the big man position. Another option is to sign or trade for Trey Lyles. The Canuck Trey Lyles has been a bit of an enigma for most of his career, being a backup in Denver and Utah. He had a rep for questionable defense and effort, 2 big strikes against him joining the Raptors squad. However, Lyles came into the league at 20 years old, and has clearly improved under the wing of Greg Popovich in his 4th season. His defense got better, his rebounding improved considerably, and he became a consistent 3-point shooter, hitting an impressive 39% of his threes on almost 3 attempts per game. Lyles is signed for another season with the Spurs, but I would not mind seeing the Raptors pick up the big man from Saskatoon through a trade, or if the Spurs decide to not pick up the 2nd year of his unguaranteed contract, sign him outright. He would fit the stretch-it-out offensive scheme that the Raptors want to employ. Lastly, the Raptors could roll with Chris Boucher. Boucher is 27 years old and has had an up-and-down tenure with the Toronto Raptors. His advanced stats are great, but he often looks overmatched physically due to his thin frame, and he has a habit of launching ill-advised 3-point shots. If the Raptors need to cut their center budget, Boucher could be a cheaper option to re-sign than Serge Ibaka. Those are a few of my own ideas for the Raptors center position. In this next section, I'll be discussing the Raptors' finances and the decisions that will have to be made in free agency, along with the specter looming over every financial decisions the Raptors will make this offseason: Giannis Antetokounmpo's impending free agency in 2021. Although there hasn't been anything concrete to base this on, Giannis is clearly frustrated with his lack of success in Milwaukee, and has been tied to the Raptors and GM Masai Ujiri in rumors for years now. So let's take a look at the Raptors' salary structure over the next couple of years. The Raptors have $86 million in contracts heading into next season, meaning that they have about $30 million to play with this offseason. The season afterwards, the Raptors only have $46 million in contracts, which means that if the Raptors play their cards right, they can add multiple maximum salary contracts. And hey, look who's going to be an unrestricted free agent next offseason. Giannis Antetokounmpo and Kawhi Leonard? Yes, Kawhi Leonard has a player option after the 2nd year of his contract, meaning that if things go south in LA, hey, why not let bygones be bygones? Come on back here, you big lug! With that in mind, the Raptors need to be judicious about handing out rich contracts if they want to be a player in the 2021 sweepstakes. Probably the most important free agency decision the Raptors will have to make this offseason is Fred VanVleet's new contract. There are a number of suitors that are apparently interested in Fred's services, including the New York Knicks and the Detroit Pistons. There are 2 schools of thought regarding Fred VanVleet. The first is that he's a 26-year-old, great point guard defender who's a very strong 3-point shooter and can competently run a team. He's also a hard worker that's gotten better every season. The second school of thought is that Fred is a small guard that can be exposed by larger players on defense, and has a difficult time finishing at the rim. He also makes questionable decisions on offense from time to time, belying his steady Freddy reputation. My thoughts on Fred are thus. At 26 years old, Fred is likely to get better. He's also playing out of position at the 2, meaning that his lack of size is amplified. So if the Raptors envision Fred eventually taking the starting point guard mantle from Kyle Lowry, a long-term, big-money contract starts making a lot more sense. His mental lapses on offense will probably improve as he gets more experience running a team, just like they did with Lowry. On the flip side, I don't think that Fred VanVleet is deserving of a maximum contract. And as you start getting deeper into $20 million per year territory, the less likely I think it winds up being a good contract for the Raptors. The Knicks are reported to be interested in offering $22 million per year for Fred. That is right in the difficult decision zone for the Raptors. At that price, I could see arguments for keeping Fred and ones for moving on. Personally, I think I would keep him at that price and hope he lives up to the deal. Another big future salary commitment the Raptors have to keep in mind is a potential OG Anunoby extension. OG was one of the biggest bright spots for the Raptors in the playoffs this season, and it looks like he's starting to develop an offensive repertoire that could expand his role from simply a 3-and-D player to a guy that could have a big role in a team's offense. Something to consider is that good 3-and-D players, which Anunoby already is, are a hot commodity in the NBA for a good reason. So when you look at a 23-year-old 6'7" 3-and-D player with still untapped upside, you should probably expect a big payday. 3-and-D guys have made a lot of money in the past, like former Raptor DeMarais Carroll, Nicholas Batum, Otto Porter, and Klay Thompson, to name a few contracts that worked out and a few that didn't. The Raptors might be looking at another $15 to $20 million per season contract. I think that keeping OG should be a priority for the Raptors, as I think that he's only scratched the surface of what he's capable of. I think it would be a mistake to allow OG to go into restricted free agency next summer, as he could easily start cutting into the Raptors' 21-22 cap space if his play continues to improve. So let's pencil OG and Fred into our handy-dandy Excel spreadsheet. You'll notice that if the Raptors commit those salaries to OG and Fred, the Raptors will be bumping right up against the salary cap, and they wouldn't have even addressed their needs at center. Ibaka is probably the most likely to be the starting center for the Raptors next season, but if the Raptors extend OG this offseason and sign Fred, they would have to go deep into the luxury tax in order to retain Ibaka. One idea is to offer Serge a 1-year contract with the money in the $15 million per year area, and hold off on OG's contract until he hits restricted free agency. That would allow the Raptors to stay under the luxury tax, keep all three of Fred, OG, and Ibaka for at least one season, and then maintain max contract space next offseason. The downside would obviously be that you've waited another season into OG's career, meaning that if he continues to improve, he could entice teams to offer him a huge deal in restricted free agency that the Raptors would have to match or potentially lose him. My preferred option would be to extend OG, sign Fred as our point guard of the future, and then do some good old-fashioned Raptor bargain hunting for our center. In a pinch, the Raptors could trot out OG at center and run the small lineup that flustered the Celtics in the conference semifinals. Maybe not for entire games, but enough that you don't have to feel the burn from having a true starting center on your squad. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts regarding the Raptors offseason. Still to come is the entire conversation about the draft that will undoubtedly be the topic of a future episode, so that's something to look forward to. As always, please remember to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Also, please follow me at Raptors Report for more Raptors and NBA related conversations. I'm trying to crack 100 followers on there, which is kind of pathetic. Help a brother out. And lastly, thank you for watching Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.